started. Okay, so this week's Torah portion is Korach. So real quick, I'd love to know, because I'd like to start class with this, where everyone is from. Just go on ahead and put in the chat room, where are you from? Where are you sitting at this moment in our synagogue, in our online community? And I'm going to pull up my 3 texts that I'm using for tonight. I'm using the JPS text. Let's see. There we go. I'm also using the 5 Books of Moses by Robert Alter. And I have one other book I'm using tonight, The Bible with Sources Revealed by Richard Elliott Friedman. All right, and we are at Numbers 16. And if anyone needs it, I can repost the link to Mechon Mamre. So, let's see where everyone is from. This is one of my favorite things to do. Houston, Texas, St. Paul, Minnesota, Jackson, Mississippi, Israel, awesome. Crowley, Louisiana, curled up in bed. North Carolina, Brooklyn, Shalom from Albany, New York, Ontario, Canada, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Toronto. Okay, awesome. Okay, and I am reposting what we're going to be reading tonight. Okay, great. So, let's see. So we'll say the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. It is a blessing to have the opportunity to study the words of Torah. And it's a blessing because there are a lot of people in this world who don't have the blessing to sit in one place, to have quiet and to have reflection, and to be able to have moments like these. Alex is asking, I assume I'm the rabbi. I'm a rabbinical student. I'll be a rabbi in a month. Where are you, Rabbi? I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Specifically North Druid Hills, specifically Toco Hills. All right, great. So, let's go on ahead and put this out there. How many people know what this week's Torah portion is about? What we'll do is a little sort of freestyling here. Let's just go on ahead and put out, what this is about. Does anyone know? I gave, if you're on our Facebook or on our Twitter or in our email, you may have gotten some hints, but I'd love to know, if anyone knows anything about Korach, what's, what have we got? Okay, so Michael says rebellion. Okay, so rebellion's definitely part of it. There's actually 2 rebellion stories that are linked into one. Alex says, how do you rewind? You can't rewind because it's a live program, but it will be posted. It will be posted online, so you can watch it after the fact. Anyone else know? Anything else about this week's Torah portion? We have rebellion, going once, going twice. Okay, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the whole thing's about rebellion. And then it goes into talking about priestly sacrifices. So let's start. We'll read. Let me find where I want us to start here. Okay, so 16... Oh, whoops. I clicked on the wrong thing here. I took us to Exodus and not Numbers 16. My mistake. Let me repost that here. Alex wants me to prove that this is live by saying the word pastrami sandwich. All right, well, pastrami sandwich. It's live. Okay, so I posted the wrong thing, and here we go. So, Korach. Now, Korach, son of Issachar, son of Koloth, son of Levi, betook himself, along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and on son of Peleth, descendants of Reuben. Okay, so we have this long string of names. So this is the way that Torah talks. It talks in terms of toledot. It talks in terms of generations. And this is important because we have this idea here of the son of Levi, but then we have this idea of the descendants of Reuben. And the reason why we have these two sort of tribal familial names, is because the story of Korach in this week's Torah portion is actually two stories that have been combined together in one, but they have the same theme, which is the story of rebellion. I'm actually going to grab this book right here because it's a little easier text to read. Okay, so they took up before Moses 250 men of the Israelites, community chieftains, persons called up to a meeting, men of renown. And they assembled against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You have too much. For all the community, they are all holy, and in their midst is the Lord, and why should you raise yourselves up over the Lord's assembly?" And Moses heard and fell on his face. Okay, so what do we have here? We have this guy named Korach. We don't know anything about him other than the fact that, he's the son of a bunch of people, right? Okay. So that's supposed to be significant on some level. We don't really know why. We know Levi. Okay, we know Levi is important, right? Because we're talking about the priestly system. The Levies were important part of that. But all of a sudden we have something about the sons of Reuben or Ruvain. We don't really know what's going on there. And then we have Korach's complaint here. So Korach's complaint is, "You have too much. For all the community, they are holy, and in the midst is the Lord, and why should you raise yourselves up over the Lord's assembly?" So does anyone have a sense of what this means, what's being sort of talked about here? When it says, what do we think Korach's complaint is? Go on in and shout it out if you have a sense of what Korach's complaint is here. Let's summarize it. So let's see. Alex says, "I think it's to praise God." Okay, well, okay, so we could say that there's something having to do with that, possibly. There's a few other kind of something else going on here. So Tamara says, "Some have too much and others not enough." Okay. So definitely there's a possibility there because it says something about you have too much. Well, but what does that mean? What do they have too much of? Right? Too much stuff, too much what do they have? So Griesberg says Korach's ego. Moses was humble, didn't want what God had charged him with. Okay. All right. So we have something about Korach being egotistical. Do we have, any other ideas about this? And Alex, it's okay that you're new to Torah. Too much say, too much influence is what Diego says. Okay, so I think that there's, a lot to say. I think that Diego, you really did nail that part. Gail says, "Was Korach greedy?" Okay, well, let's look at it. Okay, so I posted the link there so that you can look at this text. So he took 250 men of the Israelites. And in this translation, I'll actually read the translation you're reading, so it's a little bit easier. So this is Numbers 16:2. Okay. The children of Israel, 250 men, they were princes of the congregation, the elect men of the assembly, men of renown, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and Aaron and set upon them, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so what we know immediately is that these were important folks, right? These are the princes of the congregation, right? Or it says here, the community chieftains is another way that it's translated here. Okay, so these are some, important folks. It's the elect men of the assembly, the men of renown. All right? And then something interesting happens here where Korach's words are, "You take too much upon yourself, seeing all the congregation are holy, right? So what he's saying here is, you, Moses, you're taking on so much. You're being the big boss. You're being the one who's in charge here. But don't you know that all of the children of Israel are holy? Now, this line is very interesting because this is actually sort of a retranslation of Exodus 19:6, where Moses is said that the Israelites will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? Okay, so we have an earlier text from Exodus that's talking about um, all of Israel, B'nai Israel, all the children of Israel are holy. But if all of us are holy, then who the heck is this Moses guy? Who we know from the text is kind of this meek, mumbly, speech impediment kind of guy. You know, who is he to get to be in charge, right? Who is he to get to talk to God directly? Okay, so it's an interesting question. Griesberg asked the question, the children of Israel were acting anything but holy, right? Okay, so definitely a point there. Michael makes the point he's portraying Moses as a dictator. Okay, I agree completely. He is totally portraying Moses as a spiritual dictator, right? So this is the equivalent of the jerk rabbi on the bema, right? This is, or anyone. Like, you could apply this to any religion. You could say that this is the man or woman who thinks that they are in charge of everybody, but seeing as how we are B'nai Israel, we are the children of God, and we are to be Or L'Goyim, we are to be a light unto nations. Where does Moses get off saying that he is the one in charge here? Okay, now, the story of Korach is generally treated like a populist revolt. It's treated like it is something that would have made sense, right? Moses is being portrayed as sort of the guy who's, in glitter and rhinestones and gold and has, a harem around him. Now, he didn't, but, that's how he's being portrayed in the story. And that Korach and all of these men they're really sticking up for B'nai Yisrael. They're sticking up for the Hebrews, okay? Does anything about that seem strange? Do we agree that this is a populist revolution? Is Korach like a man of the people? Is he that revolutionary who's going to, throw off the chains of Moses that is, that are on the people? Is there anyone who sort of agrees with that, or does there seem to be something that's a little bit of that seems to be a little bit fishy about that? Because that seems to be Korach's statement, right? We're all equal in the eyes of God. So who are you, Moses? Right? Where do you get off thinking that you are the leader? So Diego says, perhaps it's not Moses who has the problem, and the problem lies with Korach, who can't handle that Moses was charged with this role. Macromint says, Korach sure fancied himself as a populist leader. Griesberg makes a nice joke. Korach was just being mana depressive. Nice. Okay, Michael says, no, Korach is in the company of men of renown, fairly popular elites. Okay, so bingo. Right there, we immediately know Korach is not exactly sort of the worker's struggle, It's not that kind of story, and glamorizing it in that way doesn't work, right? We can't read, a sort of turn-of-the-century American labor story here, right? This is not the French Revolution, to use another generation. Instead, what we have are really, and this is what I alluded to on Facebook, we basically have yuppies. We have this story here of these men of renown led by Korach. And Korach is saying, look, who are you? And Diego makes a comment here that's fantastic. It's envy and jealousy at play. Yeah, and I agree completely. Now, here's something that happens that's really fascinating. Um, we get into a challenge that gets placed here. And Moses, this is verse 8, so chapter 16, verse 8. And Moses says to Korach, "Listen, pray, sons of Levi. Is it too little for you that the God of Israel divided you from the community of Israel to bring you close to him, to do the work of the Lord's tabernacle, to stand before the community to service them? And he brought you close, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. And will you seek priesthood as well? Therefore, you and all of your community who band together against the Lord." And then something really strange here happens. It says, "Therefore, you and all your community who band together against the Lord." And then all of a sudden there's this pause, and it says, "And Aaron, what is he that you should murmur against him?" It's kind of a weird comment here. It just kind of breaks. It doesn't translate very well. And so in his book, Robert Alter, who is a terrific Bible scholar, makes an interesting comment here. And he basically says that what we have are two stories that are being glued together. And so he uses this comment on verse 11. He says, "The syntax here seems a bit disjunct," or, screwy would be another word you could use. Perhaps because the story of Korach is at this point interrupted by the story of Dathan, and Abiram. I'm sorry, I don't have the Hebrew in front of me, so I can't pronounce these names right. Aaron is singled out here because he is among the Levites' clans. It is upon Aaron and his sons that priesthood has been conferred. Okay? So we have this weird break all of a sudden in the story. And then we get into verse 12, and it says, "And Moses sent to call the sons of Eliab, and they said, We will not go up. It is too little that you brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to put us to death in the wilderness, that you should also actually lord it over us. What's more, to a land flowing with milk and honey you have not brought us, nor given us any estate of fields and vineyards. Would you gouge out the eyes of these men? We will not go up." And Moses was very incensed, and he said to the Lord, "Do not turn to their offering. Not a donkey of theirs have I carried off, and I have done no harm to any of them." Okay, so it's this weird, strange break all of a sudden with this story of the two sons of Eliab, right? We were talking about Eliab. We have this weird little thing here, the sons of Reuven, in the first verse of Korach. Then they don't get mentioned at all. We have no mention of these two guys. And then all of a sudden they come back, and then in verse 16 they disappear again, right? And we don't know who these guys are. We have no clue. But for some reason, they're sort of woven in together. And it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't actually make textual sense. So what are we left with? And I think, honestly, what we're left with is the fact that these are two different stories. We have a story here where these two sons of Eliab, who again we don't know who these guys are being put in, and it's mixed with this genre of Korach, this Korach type story. And the only reason we can sort of make this make sense is the fact that when you kind of step back from the Torah, when you step back from the way the story is written, what we learn is the fact that the Torah is not a linear story. It's not a story that's written once upon a time, beginning, middle, end. It's not that kind of story. In fact, the entire Hebrew Bible doesn't work that way, right? It's actually written by genre. So you have these different genres of writers, and you have these different types of perspectives, and over time you have redactors who look at those stories and they edit them and they put them together in ways that make sense. But it's not a linear story. Now, in some cases it is. Sometimes you do have a beginning, middle, and end. But in other times you have all these weird kind of back roads, and you have all these sort of weird ways that different, you know, different stories are woven together in ways that don't necessarily make a ton of sense. And so what you have to do is you have to step back from our very Western way of reading and our very Western way of understanding stories, where it's a traditional beginning, middle, end. And you have to instead think from a Hebrew brain, think from a Hebrew perspective, which is, how does this story and how does this story connect together? And Diego makes a really cool comment here. Maybe the stories try to convey the mastery of time that Hashem possesses. I think that's terrific. It's a terrific way of viewing it. So then all of a sudden we jump back into the Korach story. All right? So, and then towards the end, it gets glued together. So what are these two stories talking about ultimately? On one hand, you're talking about a spiritual rebellion, and that's really what the Korach story is. It's a story of a rebellion that is spiritual. Then you have the sons of Reuven, the children from that familial line, and you have a political story. So, what do we know about people from the past that are being talked about here? We know that the secular, so the non-religious world, the sort of sphere of education and government and the way society is organized, and the sacred, so the world of religion and ritual and text, are one and the same. The Hebrews had no understanding of religion, and you will never find the word religion in the Bible. There is no concept called religion. There's tribes, there's families, there's nations, there's priests, there's kings, chiefs, etc., etc. There's no word for religion. And that's because this is in a time when the sacred and the secular were woven together into one thing. And, you know, it's fair to say that when these stories were being passed around orally, you know, one story about the sons from the family of Reuven, and then the story of Korach, that it made sense. That these stories should somehow be glued together. They fit in the same genre. And you can do this with all sort of parts of the Hebrew Bible. You can look at, there's lots of different places where stories that on just a very Western, American, or industrialized nation way of looking at a text don't line up, but you can see why from a Hebrew, Eastern, Near Eastern mind, it actually works out really well. So, that's basically what the story is. It's talking about who gets to be in charge. Now, what I think is interesting is that in the end, Korach loses. Does anyone know how Korach loses? Going once, going twice. Two ways, because the stories are really combined together. So you have fire, and you also have people being swallowed alive by the earth. And that's how the story ends. So Moses is effectively the winner of this, right? The winner of this story. So I would ask this question, which is, you know, do you think that Moses won, right? So Moses makes a challenge, and obviously, you know, Korach dies, and so do all of, you know, his congregants, for lack of a better word, right? Do you think ultimately, though, that this question of the whole congregation being holy and one person getting to be the leader. Do you think that ultimately Moses won? I'd be curious to know if you have any opinions on that. So Griesberg says Moses didn't need to win or lose. He was God's tool, God's agent. Okay, fair enough. Right. So we could say that it doesn't matter. Would you say that fast forwarding to today, fast forwarding to our current generation, looking at this text, would you say that Korach won or did Moses win? I mean, it's a very kind of preposterous question, but go with me on this one, right? Who thinks, so we'll do an internet show of hands. Who thinks Moses won? Who thinks that Korach won? And you have to vote, so I expect to see 15 votes in the chat room. So Diego says that Moses didn't win. Griesberg says it doesn't matter because really God was the one who won. Michael says Moses won because Korach died. Okay. What else? What are some other thoughts? So it looks like we have, one for Moses, one for Korach, and one for God. This is a very Jewish thing to have 3 opinions. Any other comments? Who won, Korach or Moses? So I'm going to give you my opinion, which is that I think Moses won the battle, but I think Korach won the war. And Diego actually nailed it, what I was going to say. Now, Griesberg makes an incredible comment. So Griesberg is right in the sense that he says Korach won in that he was immortalized in Torah. Okay, absolutely true, right? I mean, in a sense, anyone who's in the Torah wins, right? Because you get to be known forever. Diego makes the comment, though, that Moses didn't win in the sense that a unified authority is no longer present today. Okay, so that's, if we were going to make this a simple black-white type of thing, I would say that that's the case. I would say that Moses lost. And that Korach is really the one who won. Because today we ask this question about our Jewish leaders. Who are you? Who are you to get to lead, right? Who's this guy that he gets to lead Torah study? Why am I not leading Torah study? Well, the reason you aren't leading Torah study is because you didn't volunteer to do it. And that's an easy thing to do. All you have to do is email me. But, really, right? Like, who ordains rabbis? Right? Like, why does this guy get to be a rabbi when that person over there seems holier? Or why do we even need rabbis? Why do we even need religious leaders, right? These are conversations that people have. I mean, people debate whether or not we need synagogues, right? So, I mean, I would say that in a sense, Korach won because we're still fighting, right? We're still trying to prove who's the Holy One and who's not. Luckily the earth hasn't swallowed us alive, and the fire from before God hasn't consumed us. But look at other texts that we have. We have the story of Nadav and Avihu, which is one of my favorite texts. We go to synagogue on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, and hopefully more often than that, to get close to God. And yet, Nadav and Avihu get close to God, and they die. Right? So, it's this interesting thing of, what happens when you get close. Now, if we read Korach differently, if we read him as being a populist, don't judge him for being rich, right? And don't judge him for having rich friends. He really is a populist. He really does care. I mean, we'll just kind of go with that. Then why? Why does Moses get to be in control? But then we can read the story the other way, which is that Korach was this yuppie jerk who wanted all the political power. And he used religion, He used this line of, well, aren't we all holy to get to, to get to be the one in charge? Because that's what he really wanted. He didn't really care about the Hebrew people. He didn't care about the Levi. He cared about himself and his own political power. And he used religion as a means by which to debate, his right to get to be the one in charge. Macromint says, how APT. Normally I read APT as apartment. How appropriate is the comparison to now versus then, where now the holy and the secular are much more separate? What are the parameters here? And, that's a great point. I would say on a certain level that the secular and the sacred aren't as... I don't think that they really are as separate as we think they are. I really don't. In so much as even if we removed, and I'll say this, I'm speaking from an American 30-something-year-old perspective on this, so you have to bear with me if my perspective seems totally way off. But, if we were to remove every single mention of religion from our political discourse, if we were to remove every time a politician spoke about a question of faith or a question of religious belief, if we were to stop elected officials from speaking in churches or speaking in other sacred institutions like synagogues, mosques, community centers, right? If we were to completely divorce the two, I think at the end of the day, it still would not completely separate our religious institutions from the secular world. I don't think it would be entirely possible. I don't think that the separation of church and state exists as we think it does in our sort of in my, I should say, Western American viewpoint. Now, part of that could be the fact that I live in the Southeast, right? So they have opening prayer before legislative session. It could be because when I watch the debates on TV, religion is brought up all the time, right? We in America are a religious nation. 20% of America identifies as sort of none of the above or no religion at all. But I think at the same time, it's impossible for us to say that, number one, we don't all believe in something, or at least put our faith in something. Even if we believe that it's, completely divorced from religion, I think people still have an inclination towards the sacred and the transcendental, which is completely undivorceable from the human experience. I really don't think you can divorce religion. What I call religion can be divorced from the human experience. And I think, therefore, because you can't separate religion from people, and people are the backbone of secular society, I don't think you can separate religion from the secular world. What we do with it, I guess, is a different question. Griesberg makes the comment, without the sacred and the secular being linked, society would not survive. I think on some level that's true. Macrolman says, maybe I'm incredibly cynical, but I see most of politicians' religious referencing as a fairly craven device. It's honesty and cynicism are sometimes a very, very fine line. So I understand completely where you're coming from. I think that there are sincere people in the world. I think there are insincere people in the world. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater on that one. So speaking back to what we were talking about here in Korach, I think it's important that we recognize a couple of things. So the first is that Korach's rebellion was not a popular rebellion, meaning it was not the children of Israel all rising up against Moses. Now we have that story, right? We have that story several times. But this particular story is about one individual who sells himself as the person who is looking out for everybody. What we know about Korach is that he was part of the elite. We know that he was well connected. So what do we know about Moses? Well, we know that Moses was sent down the Nile in a basket. We know that he didn't think highly of himself. He was incredibly meek. He could barely talk. He had a speech impediment. He constantly begged God to not be the one in charge. He really did not want his role. And throughout the Bible, we find this same refrain over and over again. The Jewish tradition doesn't like people that are extreme, right? You can never be too beautiful. And you can never be too smart. You can never be too rich. On the flip side of the coin, you can never be too poor. You can never be too holy. The one thing that you can be that is acceptable, the one extreme that you can have, is to be too humble. That's the one extreme that is acceptable in Judaism. That you can be too humble, too meek. And so when a guy like Korach sort of enters into that space, and you see his charisma, and you see his man of the people kind of way of talking, and then you put him up against this kind of bumbling Moses who just doesn't think too much of himself, and all that. It's easy to think that either Moses actually was better than the Torah paints him. The Torah paints him as kind of, this guy who needed his brother to do everything for him, right? So we either build him up as being like Charlton Heston, right? Is that guy, that Moses. We can handle that Moses. We can handle tough, strong Moses, right? We can't handle kind of wimpy Moses, who throws him, literally it says, in this week's Torah portion, that upon hearing what Korach says about the children of Israel and holiness, he throws himself on the ground, right? Which is normally, that's actually a statement of, it's actually a statement of worship usually. Like if you throw yourself on the ground, then it's because you are, prostrating as part of worship. In this case, he's not. This is actually him sort of freaking out and having an emotional breakdown, right? So that's the Moses that we know, is that guy. He's the mumbling guy who throws himself on the ground when someone criticizes him. The Moses that his father-in-law, the Midianite, has to tell him how to run the Hebrews, right? Get judges, appoint judges who can handle your work for you because you're going to burn out, as it says in Parsha Yitro, right? We have that sense of who Moses is, up against the sort of slick Korach, who has everything under control. And so I think the lesson we can gather there is you never know who's going to be holy. You never know who's going to win out. The Torah says that Moses is the guy, that's the kind of leader we need, right? In the long run, Korach won, because we don't have that sort of centralized authority. But Korach is not in the story being called the Holy One. He may be right. He may have actually been right. But he was not the Holy One. Moses was. So, like all good religions, Judaism looks at who is the weak, who is the person who has holiness on their minds and venerates that person. And that's the person that we should put up on a pedestal. We don't put up on a pedestal the person who's right. We put up the person who represents what right should be. And that's what Moses is. He's what rightness should be, even though Korach technically is right in this case. We tell stories as we want society to operate, or as we view society operating. And I think in this case, the Torah is telling us a story about who we should venerate, who we should put up on those pedestals. Put the guy or the gal up who is the weak and mumbling sort of person, right? And the second story, or the second point I'll make, is the fact that we have two stories combined together here. And so why? Like, if that makes no literary sense, why do it? And that's because the Torah draws parallels. So in the Torah, we have two paralleling stories that are mixed together. One's a story about the sacred, and one's a story about the secular. But the Torah has no problem with mixing these two stories together, even if it doesn't make sense. And the reason why is that life has parallels. Why do we continue to read the Torah? Why do we continue to study the Bible? We continue to study it, we continue to read it, because it draws true parallels. It draws parallels to our own life. It teaches us about ourselves. It's not just a story of ancient ancestors, and it's not just a story of spiritual ancestors. It's a story about us. Reading the Torah is looking in a mirror and seeing yourself, and seeing the good parts of yourself and seeing the bad parts of yourself. So, I'm going to end on that note. We are a nonprofit organization, meaning that we need your financial support. So there's a donation button here at the top. You can donate via PayPal. We also need your time support. We need to have your involvement. We need to have you teaching classes like this, leading Shabbat services, leading different kinds of online events. We need you, we need you, we need you. So please get involved. You can email me, patrick@punktorah.org. You can also click on the picture of my face next to my fiance's face right there. That's my Facebook. You can friend me on Facebook. I would love to be friends with you on Facebook. Griesberg asks, did you get the $17 you asked for earlier? Yes, we did. We did get a donor who donated $17 to pay for our website hosting. So we really appreciate that donation. But let me tell you something. Give before we have to ask. We ask rarely for donations. And the reason why we do that is we only ask when we need it. Let's work together to be able to support the community so that no one in the community ever has to ask. That would be a profound thing. If every person in the chat room tonight gave $5 tonight, $70. $70 would almost cover 1 month of live streaming, because it costs about $100 a month for us to live stream classes and services, right? So give before you're asked. Yankel makes a point here that you are allowed to ask. Absolutely, you're allowed to ask. But let's get to a point where instead of asking for $17 or asking for $20 or $30, let's get to a point where we're not asking for that and we're asking for something a little bit bigger. Right? Michael says, wow, I never knew it was that much. Yeah, it costs $100 a month to broadcast this. So please give. Again, $5 or $10. If we had $5 or $10 just right now from each person here, that would cover it. That would cover it. And again, it's a nonprofit. All donations are tax deductible. And also we need your volunteering. Your volunteering is incredibly important. So again, donate by clicking the link above. Email patrick@punktorah.org. Get involved. This Friday, Shabbat services at 8 p.m. with Ketzira. There's going to be an email that will go out on Wednesday about that. If you're not on our email list, if you look to the left of the screen here, you'll see the little sign up for email. Please sign up. Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you Friday, June 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern for Shabbat services. Thanks a lot.
Oh.